Wagwan fam, a day late and a dollar short. It's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you on Tuesday. If you're wondering why the Filthy Casuals Guide to DC and Stipe dropped so early, because I was reconfiguring some things yesterday, so I didn't think I'd be able to get the podcast out. I had that ready to go, and I thought, fuck it, do it. We'll see how it works out over the long run. I don't know if it's more effective to plug it to high heaven like the week the fight's happening, or is it more effective to put it out a couple of weeks early and let the traffic build up? We'll see. But if you haven't watched that, go and watch that. And today we're going to be talking about the fights that happened last weekend and the fights that are going to happen next weekend. Big midweek podcast. And if you look at the schedules, things are getting back to, eerily sort of normal, which is pretty good. I mean, America is still a mess. The UK is still a mess. But if you look at the schedule for this week, you got KSW's doing an event. Are they doing? I presume it's in Poland, but it could be somewhere else. Hold on. Yeah, they're doing an event in Warsaw, which is in Poland, for my American listeners. And then you got Pancrase and Rizin both opening up in Japan. So, you got some stuff happening. In addition to Bellator being back in business and the UFC continuing at the Apex Center. And last week you had Invicta and LFA come back as well, and one, which we will talk about later. So it looks like our drought period is sort of coming to an end. However, if you did watch last week's UFC event, it was cursed. It was a cursed card. The number of bouts that were cancelled, very close to the fight. Incredible. Borg drops out of his fight at last minute because of weigh-in issues, we presume. Kevin Holland lost his fight, was desperately looking for another fight the same day. Eric Spicely was looking unhealthy during the weight cut, so they took him out of the fight and then they cut him from the promotion. It was a bit of a bloodbath, if we're honest, the lead up to this card. So you ended up with 9 fights, which compared to the week before's 15 fights, it's almost half. And in fact, here on the Wikipedia page, it says actually no, 8 bouts, and it was the smallest UFC event since UFC 177. In August of 2014. What was that card? Oh, good God. That was Dillashaw versus Soto. So, last-minute replacement in the title fight. Oh, Bethe Correia versus Shayna Baszler. Yancy Medeiros versus Damon Jackson. Tony Ferguson versus Danny Castillo in the co-main, but that's very early in Tony Ferguson's UFC run. So anyway, the thing you probably want to hear about is Derek Brundleman. Yeah, Derek Brunson dyed his hair, or bleached his hair blonde, and came out looking better than ever, which was really strange. He was matched up against Edmund Shabazian, who is Ronda Rousey's charge. I don't know. She manages him, but she used to train with him at the Glendale Fight Club. He's a student of Edmund of House Targaryen, and he's been advertised like he's been hot shit lately. He came into the UFC with kind of a boring decision win over, was it Darren Stewart? But then he just smoked like 3 guys back to back in the first round. Can wrestle, can kick, can box decently, and was finishing people, which is always a big selling point. Meanwhile, Derek Brunson is a guy who had almost comically bad striking. And he's an old guy too. He's getting to be, 36? He's getting old in the division. Always had potential because he could always hit really hard. And he went, he stuffed every takedown Yoel Romero tried to hit him with, and he out-wrestled Yoel Romero way back in the day. But yeah, I want to say there are skills there, but he does also fight in a way, or had always fought in a way that didn't really bring them to lever. He always sort of relied on his athleticism. And it really started to get ridiculous around about the time he fought Sam Alvey. Another win for communism in that one. But he immediately charged in on Alvey, pressed into the fence and started hitting away, chin high in the air. And it worked really well. He overwhelmed Alvey, and then he tried that in every subsequent fight. And it doesn't work from out in the center of the cage when the guy has room to circle off, move, frame, and so on. And the very embarrassing loss to Robert Whittaker is probably the most memorable instance of Brunson just running in with his chin up in the air. Literally pointing at the ring lights. His shoulders are about 5 feet forward of his hips. It's incredible. But after the disastrous performances against Jacare and Adesanya, he changed camp and had a couple of he had a boring one against Elias Theodorou, and then he had it was one against Ian Heinisch. But the entertaining part of that fight was Ian Heinisch doing Granby rolls and shit. The entertainment was not brought by Brunson, but Brunson did win. However, in this one, I thought he looked really quite measured, and it was a case where he can be very fast and very explosive, and that has been something that he hangs his hat on, or has hung his hat on. But by taking a little bit off that, by not needing to fire at 100 miles an hour every time, he had more success as a result. You know, you see this a lot in Muay Thai with like really good kickers. You know, obviously Derek Brunson not a Lumpini level kicker, but he was doing really well with his open side kicking game in this one against Shabazian, who is a pretty hard, fast kicker. And if you noticed, like, Brunson was throwing him about like 75% speed. It was almost like the slow ball of these strikes was throwing Shabazian off. But that's something you see in like high level boxing and so on. You know, you don't throw every strike at 100% because you don't. You know, that's firstly a very energy consuming way to fight. But also, by throwing slower strikes, you not only can slip them through by them being a little bit slower, but you set the expectation. You know, if you throw everything as fast as you and hard as you can all the time, very easy for the guy to start to read you. And, you know, rhythm is always quite a complex concept, you know, to describe. But guys get into the pattern of like, now I'm going to attack. Fake. Now I'm going to attack, you know. And if you always go at one speed, it's a lot easier to read. But I thought Brunson was doing very well here, sort of fighting lackadaisically for the most part. And then he'd throw a 1-2 like lazily and stick his chin out and go in with the extra 2 on the end. And that'd be at 100% speed, and that would catch Edmund Shabazian backing up. And watching this, I thought a lot of Robert Whittaker, actually. I'm always saying that he's 75% sharp, clever technique and 25% daft swinging. And the same is true of Dustin Poirier, who we're going to mention in passing later when we talk about Bobby Green. But the 25% of stupid stuff that shouldn't work, or would get you in trouble if you did it consistently, plays off the 75% of good stuff. And that's why you see Dustin Poirier doing most of his hurting on Max Holloway with the weird shifting blows, even though he's been boxing pretty, you know, not orthodoxly, but more safely for the most part, because when he does overcommit and go ham chasing his man, it's a bit more of a surprise than when he was just doing that all the time. Tactical use of messiness and brute force. We like that. And that's what you got from Brunson in this one. Like, he was, there were a few moments where he'd push to the fence and he'd go for, you know, either an underhook pin or something like that. But then he'd pull back and throw that left straight with his chin forward of his hips again. But when you're against the fence and he's pushing into his man either with his hand on their forearm or tricep, or he's leaning in with his shoulder, makes it a lot harder for them to hit back. And that was where he was having success against Alvey that time. He was pushing him off balance the entire time. If you're pushing someone into the fence physically, you're breaking their stance, you're picking them up out of their stance. When your feet are level underneath you on the fence, very hard to hit well. You know, you have to step off the fence to do it. You know, step 1 foot forward to transition your weight onto it. Or you can spread your feet really wide and do like whippy inflatable rubber man hands, but you know, it's a little bit tricky to do against competent opponents. Cough, Glover Teixeira, Ryan Bader. So yes, really enjoyed Brunson versus Shabazian, which is interesting because I thought I was going to enjoy it because I was going to see Edmund Shabazian just score another quick knockout or something like that. But I guess, you know, it's because I've been ignoring Brunson's last 2 fights because I thought they were boring. Well, no, I thought the Ian Heinisch one was boring when he was having success. But yeah, he's genuinely done a bit of a rethink and made himself sharper and smarter. And Shabazian was looking a little bit one-note in this one because, you know, I'd seen him mix in takedowns more effectively in the past. Obviously, against a strong wrestler like Brunson, that option is sort of limited for you unless you're very confident. His kicking seemed a bit stifled by it too, so he was just sort of throwing the odd rear hand body shot and not really having much success. But the rest of this card was odd, is how I describe it. I mean, obviously he had a lot of cancellations, but you're really feeling it when you're getting like Jamal Emmers versus Vincent Cachero. And Cachero clearly... Let me check if there's anything written about the circumstances around this. Okay, so Timur Valiev was replaced for undisclosed reasons. There's so many undisclosed reasons on this card. And replaced by Vincent Cachero. If you saw Cachero versus Emmers, Cachero's like 2 weight classes smaller than Emmers. And he didn't look in shape to do the full 3 rounds either. It was, you know, and then he's coming in and they're going 2 knockout wins on his record and 1 submission. And you're like, well, I don't think this guy's UFC ready. Please Why? Well, you know why you're getting these guys, because of the pandemic, but it's really starting to grate on me now. You're getting some good fights, but you're really getting a lot of filler. Nathan Menes versus Johnny Munoz was the same. It just felt all filler. Gutierrez versus Durden, another one. Durden didn't look in shape for the full fight. But we got was it a unanimous draw in that one, which is very, very rare. We'll talk about the women's fight and then we'll talk about the bangers, because there were 2 bangers on this card and I want to heap praise on them. The women's fight was Joanne Calderwood versus Jennifer Maia. No idea why this happened when they were talking about doing the Valentina Calderwood fight for the title. Not sure I care enough to look it up, but if you want to tell me in the comments, feel free. However, Calderwood, in traditional fashion, if you have the title shot and then you take a fight anyway, you lose. But very strange decision making. She decided to take Maia down and sit in her guard and then got armbarred. I've always got the sense that Calderwood doesn't really know what she's good at. And then she'll set about like working on her jiu-jitsu or something like that, and she'll armbar someone or triangle them, and people go, "Oh, she's fixed it," and then she'll lose in her next fight or 2 fights down the road. I don't even know how you go about fixing Joanne Calderwood, and it isn't interesting to us, so we'll move on. So the first of the bangers, Vicente Luke, whatever. I've been talking about him for fucking ages. No one else seems to give a shit. It was getting frustrating because, especially after the Wonderboy loss, everyone was just like, oh yeah, no interest in this guy now. And you're looking at him and going, I think at the time I was talking about him, he had 9 fights in the UFC, lost 1, finished everyone else. That kind of fighter is incredibly cool to have around. And he'd finished Nico Price, the first person to ever finish Nico Price. And he'd finished... he had a great little scrap against Leon Edwards. The guy's a beast. And this performance particularly was something of an improvement for him. We did a Filthy Casuals guide to him back in the day, but what he really brings is offensive counterpunching. He moves forward and slips inside your jab and fires the right across the top in order to start his combination, or he slips inside your jab and comes back with the left hook, or he takes your punch on his face and throws the left hook back. There's great clips of it, like Bilal Muhammad he got with this, Lyman he got with this, but he caught Wonderboy a load of times with this. When the guy gets too keen landing his punches, and Vicente Luque will take the punch on the face and throw a beautiful left hook back, and the left hook will often crack the guy, either knock him unconscious or put him on the back foot, and suddenly Vicente Luque is back in the game, The Wonderboy fight's a great example. Wonderboy was able to counter him, knock him off his feet a couple of times when he was coming forward, and then Wonderboy would start moving in on him to pursue a finish or put him to the fence and land more blows. And suddenly, Wonderboy would take a little bit too long in the pocket, and Vicente Luque would crack him upside the head, and you'd be back to that kickboxing match at range again, because he's not the kind of guy you want to try and put pressure on, generally. His downsides have always been watch the Brian Barberena fight. He just puts his hands on it. He puts his hands on his head and handcuffs himself, lets you throw at him, and then he comes back with the left hook. He's never been the most defensively slick. And he doesn't use his jab nearly enough for my liking. And, he was often short on the low kicks. He'd throw a lot of switch kicks to the body with his left leg. But I would love to see more low kicks out of him. Great thing in this fight. If he fought this game plan against Stephen Thompson, I reckon he'd have been in with a really good chance of catching up with Stephen Thompson and hurting him or knocking him out in the later going. Because what Randy Brown did, he'd come out and he'd try and show the jab or whatever, and he'd use his long stance and his long reach and try and pop the jab. And where Luke's whole career has been put your face where they want to jab and then try and slip inside it and throw the right hand, he instead took a step back, let Randy Brown jab to him, parried the jab or slipped inside the jab and threw the right low kick, or particularly the right low kick into the calf. And he was just munching up Brown's leg with this one. And very quickly, Brown went onto the defensive and was backing himself onto the fence, and then you got to see vintage Vicente Luque. He'd step in and he had the right hook and the right body kick or the low kick to stop Brown circling towards his right. He had the left hook and the left switch kick to stop him circling towards his left, and he put together combinations and just beat him up. But it was that choice to go on the back foot early and land those good low kicks, to get the money in the bank, to get the guy to tell the guy that this is the kind of fight we're having. Anytime you jab, I'm going to kick you in the leg. And then he was doing it even when Randy Brown was he just lengthened his stance with a shoulder feint and lower his level a little bit. The thing that we saw Stipe Miocic do a load of times in that Filthy Casuals guide, just the shoulder feint. But even when he did that, Vicente Luque would try and parry the jab. It wouldn't be there, but he'd still kick him in the leg. So Randy Brown very quickly had enough of those. Finish was great. He got a front headlock. And Vicente Luque, he's known for the DARS. If you don't know him, like Billy Gunn, he's a DARS man. He kept trying him on Leon Edwards, but he gets him a lot from half guard. He gets him a lot from the snap down. So he had the front headlocks, like, tried to snap him down, or Brown tried to go to his hands, and Luque kept him off them. But he landed a beautiful knee to the head and finished off that. Knees to the head from the front headlock, you don't see him often done well because of the grey area with the hands down, one hand down, one knee down, whatever. But when you do, and when you see him without the rules prohibiting them, like Mark Coleman versus Alan Goes, best example of that ever. And then the other one I really enjoyed was Bobby Green versus Lando Vannata. I was laughing at Bobby Green versus Clay Guida the other week. I was saying, what is this, 2008? But, yeah, what if Bobby Green got good all of a sudden? Their first fight was great. This one was great too. But Bobby Green really doing some interesting stuff. He's always had the shoulder roll stuff. He's always been switching stances. But he was switching to southpaw, throwing his left straight like an arm punch and leaning in with it. The McGregor sort of thing where you lean way ahead. An example of leaning, giving you an advantage as opposed to just opening you up to big counters. But then he'd do it and throw the left straight and drop in on the underhook and use the clinch well. And then he did his old foe, Dustin Poirier. He did the Poirier special, which is from southpaw. You go left straight, then you pull it back a little bit and jab with it again as you step through into orthodox and swing your right hand. And he dropped Vannata off that. And then a couple of points he was doing beautiful, like step back and right hand over the top of Vannata's jab. I thought he looked really sharp here. And he was throwing just enough kicks to keep me happy. Because if you're going to use that sort of like head movement based style, your leg has to be out there to do it. So get to low kicking early and often, or kicking generally, or push kicking. He threw a load of push kicks in this one. And that will keep the guy, hopefully, or move him away from kicking as often. And the grappling in that one was good fun too. I don't remember any standout exchange. Actually, there was a nice little back take he did along the fence. But yeah, really, really fun fight. Those guys just always providing. Lando Vannata never been in a bad fight. Bobby Green normally loses, but tends to be entertaining. But yeah, if he gets it together now, he's quite young. He's like 28 or something. I was really surprised. What if he's a Jersey Joe Walcott style figure where he just couldn't get it together because he had too much stuff going on in his life? Now he's got a little bit more time during COVID to suddenly become the great boxer. I would love that. Oh, and then, sorry, I forgot to even mention Jonathan Martinez and Frankie Saenz. I thought this was a great performance from Martinez. Martinez came in heavy, which is, he did look a lot bigger in there. But Frankie Saenz is a game guy, competent, always been around that middle level of the division. And Martinez just beat him up with knees on the open side. I'm always talking about intercepting knees, but you could see how quickly they broke this dude. He very quickly decided he didn't like going after takedowns, but then if he stood back at range, Martinez would hit him with a round kick to the body or try and high kick him or a push kick to the body. And even like the triangle kick, Sankakugeri, which is like a round kick coming up on an angle, but you're connecting with the ball of your foot. So it's sort of a hybrid-y kick. And he was landing all of those on the open side. And then immediately after that, after he landed, Frankie Saenz would press in to try and get something back, to try and get a clinch or a takedown. And he'd hit him with the intercepting knee again. It was absolutely brilliant. If you can, it's such a useful weapon. And the guy I always point to is Lyoto Machida, because he did it all with footwork, and then he'd use the knee, he'd land it, and he'd reliably be able to throw his hips back or get the underhook every time. On guys like Phil Davis and Ryan Bader, got really good wrestlers. He's beaten them because he can hit him in the stomach or the hips or the solar plexus with the knee, and then use that bump to dig the underhook and get back into a solid position to defend takedowns. I mean, if Stipe Miocic could do that against Daniel Cormier, he would win that third fight very easily. He tried it in the first round of their second fight, but didn't go back to it. Didn't feel comfortable with it. But, John Jones switched to southpaw just to land the open side body kick, the left straight to the body, and the knee. Because every time Cormier hand fought with him, the hands are off the table, but you can still knee him in the body. That's the whole point of the hand fight in Muay Thai, so that you can shut down their hands while you're trying to do stuff with your legs. Or fold over an elbow. But yeah, Martinez looked good. Kind of brutal that he gets to miss weight by 5.5 pounds and beat the shit out of an established guy who did make weight. And then one was back over the weekend. One no surrender, sorry. And they announced that they were number 6 in the world on global engagement or some shit like that. Just more hilarious lies. And if you watch, you get to hear Michael Chiavello just read off a piece of paper, just nonsense that he knows is not true. But he did have some good fights. He had, I would say good fights. He had good kickboxing and Muay Thai matches. Superlek versus Panpayak was great fun. You got to see the open side battle, both guys throwing power kicks off their rear side and just mixing it up really well. Like Superlek was doing the thing where you throw, I was talking about changing tempo in kicking, but you throw your right, he was the orthodox fighter, Panpayak was the southpaw, I believe, but you throw your right leg wide, so it looks like you're going for a middle kick, and then you bring it down and hack on the inside of the lead leg. He was throwing nice counters off it was two guys who'd fought like 7 or 8 times before, and you could tell they knew each other. It was really quite cool. What else was good? Oh, Stamp Fairtex fought Sunisa Srisen, who just, like, if you want to laugh, watch the hype package for that, where they show this last training. The girl hadn't fought in 3 years, comes back, Stamp just murders it, like double collar tie on the feet, and the girl does nothing. Like, she just stands there, like and she's supposed to be the judoka too. Just standard one matchmaking, and one generally. Their MMA is just shite. But Pech Morikot beat Yodsenklai, which was great, because Pech Morikot was robbed of his win over Giorgio Petrosian a few months back. And Rodtang and Petchdam had a great little scrap in the main event. Rodtang, one of the most interesting fighters in the world right now to watch, entertainment-wise. And, getting better, technically. People were talking about him versus Enahachi. If you've not read the Patreon boy piece we did on Enahachi, I put the audio track on that last week. But if I'm Enahachi, like, go and watch Rodtang's bouts in the cage. Because it basically, how he does is dictated by whether the card is in a ring or a cage. He is not nearly as good in the cage. It's ridiculous how easily guys circle away from him, where in the ring he's just like impossible to avoid. Which I suppose ties in with what we're going to talk about when we're talking about Adesanya versus Paulo Costa, because they just revealed they're going to be doing it at the Apex or wherever, but they're going to be using the small cage. And you're going, that's quite a big difference in that fight when you've got two gigantic dudes for a start, but especially if Israel Adesanya, because Costa's whole game plan is corralling people towards the fence, throwing in hard kicks and then banging them up with body shots and headshots. You got to think Adesanya's certainly, even if he's not worried about that, he's going to note that the ring is going to be smaller. They're going to be doing something about training for that. So let's look ahead to some of these fights coming up this week. This weekend we got the UFC event, which is Lewis versus Oleinik. I mean, if you haven't checked it out, go to the Reddit and look at the post with the Filthy Casuals guide, Cormier versus Miocic, because there is a dude having a full-on meltdown about how he feels heavyweights have been disrespected, because I flippantly ended the episode by being like, well, if Stipe even remembers to go to the bodywork. And this guy had a proper meltdown about it. But one of the responses to him was just like, Derek Lewis is number 4 ranked heavyweight in the world, mate. And then I saw someone else somewhere else on Twitter was listing, they just took a screenshot of Derek Lewis's record and wrote, looked shit for 3 rounds and then won, did terribly in this one. All his last 9 fights he's been awful in, but still he's a top 10 heavyweight in the world. Top 5, I think. Yeah, he's like number 4. It just sums up that heavyweight is a bad place full of bad fighters. And Oleinik, the craziest thing is that people got mad for me not giving Stipe enough respect in that one when I listed the things that he's good at, and I said, and incredible conditioning, which I think is an enormous compliment at heavyweight, because the guys just do not turn up ready to do 3 rounds even at heavyweight. But the biggest heart at heavyweight is what I said he had. And Alexei Oleinik, I'm not doubting he's beastly strong, but he was tapping dudes with Nogi Ezekiels and chest compressors. You don't do that in lower weight classes because guys don't tap to that. Guys don't give up as soon as things stop going their way and they get stuck. Big John McCarthy does call him the greatest submission artist in heavyweight history, though. But anyway, you got Oleinik versus Derek Lewis, and how funny is it that Oleinik just beat Fabricio Verdum and made him look like shit too, which is even more hilarious because Verdum just came back in shape and beat Alex Gustafsson. But before that, he armbarred Maurice Green, which I seem to remember was a pretty fun fight. And then it was knockout losses to Walt Harris and Alistair Overeem. You know, it's his thing. He's rubbish on the feet. He's going to swing the weird monkey punches. And then he's going to grab you and try and take you down. And if you're not good, he'll submit you. I still can't believe he choked out Junior, the big baby Albini, from the bottom with an Ezekiel choke. How bad do you have to be to get that loss on your record? But yeah, you don't need to hear about that fight because it can come down to, can Oleinik get him down early? Can Derek Lewis explode up? And then can Oleinik keep getting him down and Derek Lewis keep exploding up? Because one of them will stop shortly after the first attempt, and then the other guy will win. Probably by finish. I mean, it's 5 rounds, so it's going to definitely be by finish. Then your co-main, you got Chris Weidman versus Omari Akhmadov, who's been around since like 2014. He's been around forever. And you won't remember him because he's never finished anyone entertainingly. I don't know if he's lost entertainingly at any point, but he's just been there, just sort of grinding. Meanwhile, Weidman continues to be one of the finest technicians in the division until he loses by finish. Almost like there's just a turning point in his fights where he just gets smoked. His last one, he went up to light heavyweight to fight Dominic Reyes, and that was just dreadful. But before that, he fought Jacare, and he was doing really well until he wasn't. And the same was true against Gegard Mousasi and Yoel Romero and Luke Rockhold. It's just the Luke Rockhold one. People think that just ruined him basically because Herb Dean let him take way too much punishment, and he's not been the same since. We're currently on a 2-fight losing streak, 1-5 in his last 6 since being the UFC middleweight champion. So, and it was something I was bringing up before the Whittaker fight the other week. UFC middleweight champions have had horrible drop-offs after you lose that belt. It's just like there's no coming back. You're just done. But I mean, looking at the last 3 guys that Akhmadov's fought, I mean, he did get the decision over Al Hassan, but Al Hassan is just not good after like the first round. But if you look at the guys he's beaten, he got the draw against Marvin Vettori, and then he beat Tim Boetsch, who's very long in the tooth at this point. Zach Cummings, another guy who's been around for quite a while and not really top tier. And then Ian Heinisch is about the best fighter he's beaten, and they're very different fighters because Ian Heinisch is a guy who tries to bang but isn't great at striking, but is very good at defending grappling, whereas Chris Weidman is a guy who's going to jab and try and take you down and maul you. Probably. But I mean, this could be Omari Akhmadov's chance to make a name for himself by just getting a big finish in a good place on the card. Then what else? Darren Stewart versus Mark Pitalo. I don't care. Yana Kunitskaya versus... Benil Dariush is back against Scott Holtzman. Bit of a weird matchup for Dariush in terms of ranking, because he's on a 3-fight finishing streak now? 4-fight finishing streak? Yeah, just finished Drakkar Klose in that really crazy back and forth brawl. But all just trying to rebound from that loss to Alexander Hernandez in 2018. This guy was a top 10 lightweight, and they just don't give him that respect anymore. It's crazy. Kevin Holland's got a quick turnaround. He's fighting Joaquin Buckley, or Joaquin Bucky, if you will. Tim Means is on the card against that Argentinian lad. Nasrat Hakparas on the card. And then it's just like sort of filler. Gavin Tucker's there. But elsewhere in the fight world, we got Bellator 243. And when there's a Bellator, I'm going all in on Coca. So if you want to get your bets in on all in on Coca, I have put down a £3 bet to win £13 back on Michael Chandler, Matt Mitrione, Curtis Millender, and Miles Jury. So basically just the UFC vets, except for Benson. And no disrespect to Benson, this is done on who the favourite is at my bookie. I can see Mitrione fucking this one up for me. I mean, I can see the main event being close because the last one was close and really exciting. But I can see Mitrione fucking it up for me. But I could see him knocking out Tim Johnson as planned. Curtis Millender, there's always the chance that the guy touches his legs and Curtis Millender remembers that it's not a kickboxing match and gives up immediately. And then Miles Jury, he was in the UFC for a while and getting kicked around by the end of it, so don't know if he's a safe bet. But we're giving it a go. These aren't particularly heinous mismatches. In fact, I don't know they're particularly mismatches at all, but, it's Coca tradition. We bet on the favourites. And we would have won last time if it weren't for one judge's scorecard. One corrupt, probably racist judge. But if you haven't seen the first fight between Chandler and Henderson, it's a really good watch. Benson Henderson, obviously not as good as he was back when he was the UFC heavy lightweight champion. He was about the best champion they had apart from Penn for a point, because he was getting the defenses in and they were very controversial a lot of the time. The thing about Henderson is that he can have like a razor close... I reckon he could have a razor-close fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov right now. This is the power of Benson Henderson. He's incredibly durable, and he makes messy fights. And sometimes they're boring, sometimes they're fun. But it will always come down to like one judge's scorecard, no matter how good or bad the fighter he's against is. But Michael Chandler is apparently trying free agency after this one. If I could bet on anything, I would love to bet on him not doing that, but I don't think they're going to let me. Best prediction, Chandler scrapes a win and announces that he's the most difficult matchup for Khabib. And then in terms of other fun stuff, KSW's card apparently only has 2 people on it, so I can't really tell you much about that. But Rizin's back, and Rizin's back over the weekend. And if you remember the last Rizin before lockdown, it was shite. It was like they'd either all their favourite fighters were injured or just busy or didn't want to take fights, because it was basically all guys you'd never heard of, even if you were following Rizin ardently. Guys like that Shrek dude. As I said at the time, it's a whole card for the creator fighters. And if I'm honest, these cards aren't amazing, but they have some fun stuff on. Rizin 22 has, Kana Asakura's on there, but she's fighting some lass with 7-6 record. Ursin Yamamoto's back. I mean, these aren't interesting. Hold on. Ayaka Hamasaki, she's decent. But the important point is that you've got Yusuke Yachi versus Roberto de Souza or Satoshi in the main event. And Satoshi, he was a gi jiu-jitsu guy who I used to reference quite a lot when we talked about the low single, because he used to dive across the mat at people's ankles. But he's been doing surprisingly well in MMA, not only as a grappler, but also he can bang pretty well. Knocked out Mizuto Hirota, knocked out Satoru Kitaoka, lost his last one to Johnny Case, and then trying to find something that he could do to like sell fights. Rizin decided to have him grapple 5 dudes in a row on one of their cards. That was Rizin 21, which was that god-awful creator fighter card. But that was strange. But he's a really interesting fighter, and Yusuke Yachi, I think I've got to the point where I've accepted he's not going to be huge now. He had a ton of potential, and he knocked out Darren Cruikshank, but he suffered 3 losses back-to-back. Luis Gustavo, Johnny Case, Mikuru Asakura. Got one back recently, but like he's just a little bit... Oh, I want to say rote. The old Pat Wyman special. He's rote. Now, he's just sort of a bit samey with his ideas. It's left body kicks and lean back right hooks from southpaw, and sort of like meat and potatoes wrestling. It's kind of Kid Yamamoto without all the talent. But I mean, he's a good fighter, and that should be a compelling matchup between him and Satoshi. And then the next night, you've got Rizin 23, which has my old boy Katetsu Boku on. I didn't even know he was still fighting against Jinoi. Boku was a really good boxer for MMA back in the day. And then he meet people like Joachim Hansen, who could just take his punches and throw back, and he'd really struggle. But the main event of this one is Kai Asakura versus Hiromasa Ogikubo. Ogikubo, you'll remember from his 2 fights with Kyoji Horiguchi. Very tough, tricky guy. You'll also remember him from looking exactly like Sakuraba and doing that amazing reaction face when the guy on Tough said, "I'm smart." And then Kai Asakura is about the most exciting prospect that Rizin has, to be honest, outside of Kyoji Horiguchi, who I think we can say now is not a prospect, but an established world-class name. But Kai Asakura had a really weird year. He was doing amazing things. He was on a 4-fight winning streak. He'd beaten Kizaiman Saiga, who's kind of, I like him for the things that he does. He has a really good front kick and stuff, but not a great MMA fighter. Beat Manel Cape, who's decent. Couple more wins. Got a fight against Kyoji Horiguchi because Kyoji Horiguchi was fighting everyone at that time. Wasn't a title fight because it's Japan, but he knocked out Kyoji Horiguchi in 1 minute and 8 seconds. Broke Olga Sasaki's jaw in his next fight. Was scheduled to fight Kyoji Horiguchi again to actually win the belt. Then Horiguchi got injured, so they vacated the bantamweight belt. They set up Kai Asakura versus Manel Cape. Manel Cape actually knocked him out. It was incredible because Manel Cape has been he's like Crazy Horse. I'm not even going to say but. He's just like a big banger who thinks an awful lot of himself and does antics, but has never really proven himself particularly great. And then he just came out of nowhere and knocks out Kai Asakura. And Kai Asakura had already beaten him once, which is even more crazy. So now Asakura hasn't done anything since December, really. He had an exhibition bout, but that doesn't really matter. So now he's coming back against Ogikubo, and that's a tough grappler he's got there. But if you haven't seen the Asakura brothers fight, they are awesome to watch. They just go forward, they apply pressure, they kick the body, they chin people, and they just they call them the Japanese Diaz brothers. That's all you need to know. And they're probably the best thing that Rizin found. Rizin got Kyoji Horiguchi. We all knew he was coming into his own, but they picked up the Asakura brothers from, was it Road, the Korean fighting organization, Road FC, where my boy Mansour Barnui fights. And they've just been a complete hit for them. Fantastic fighters. Well, let's do a quick question then. Hey Jack, I've seen you deride the EA UFC series a few times on Twitter, and I was curious, what is the best MMA game you've seen or played? What do you think would need to be in a good MMA game that has been lacking so far? I gave up on EA completely when I was consistently able to KO John Jones with a front teep while playing as Hendo in one of the early ones. I mean, suspension of disbelief is one thing, but that was just taking the piss. I'm also wondering if you've ever had any ideas about something like an MMA board or card game. I've always felt it would probably illustrate the tactics and techniques of the sport better, as opposed to video games that always seem to break down to a contest of dexterity. But on the other hand, a board game is both probably almost unmarketable, as well as more than likely unable to be played out in a relatively short space of time, while capturing enough realism and nuance to compete with even the most rudimentary video game. Not that the video games I have played have been much of either. Hope you're not climbing the walls too much given the current state of things. All the best from Francis. Cheers, Francis. Best UFC game. I think it might be the old THQ UFC games. And I think the caveat that you have to have on the UFC games is that they are always going to be kickboxing simulators with shitty groundwork. And when you meet people who want to use the groundwork, you're like, oh, fuck off. But then you don't want to just play knockout mode. The groundwork is just garbage. Mainly because, they actually included some cool things on the feet. Like, you can feint. You can begin a jab and cancel it to feint it and things like that. Or begin a switch kick or something like that. And you can flow your attacks together well. So, the right straight for a lot of the fighters on the game. And some of them don't have it, which is quite cool too. So the right straight will lead into the left body kick really well. Better kickboxers, you can get the 1-2-3 into the low kick or the 1-2 liver shot into the low kick and things like that. And that's great that stuff scales, and the better the striker is, the more likely they're able to pull it off. But the ground game is always shit. It comes down to basic numbers. And the way that it works is that you have to fake by having a seizure. Dudes just start jiggling their stick and then putting it back to neutral. You put your... It's really, really stupid. If you've ever seen it, it's just the dumbest shit. And then people are like, well, why don't you just learn to counter, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, because it's not fun. If you're getting your ass kicked on the feet, it's still fun. So I think that's the big thing that EA Sports... I mean, I'm kind of hard on them because I got a tweet a couple of years ago when they were making EA UFC 3. One of the guys working on the striking aspect of it tweeted me that he'd printed out Finding the Art, the book I wrote on Amazon a while ago, which is just a little short series of essays on the principles that govern a lot of striking sports. So I always feel kind of bad for dissing it so much, but I do keep going back to it. I think I'm just a toxic gamer. I think that might be the truth. I've been having a lot more fun playing single player shit, where the only person I can get angry at is myself, or the shitty game designer who made the game too hard. I've also been playing a lot of big narrative games on easier settings. I used to challenge myself by playing hard things, but now I'm like, I'm not going to play The Last of Us 2 on hard. I'm just going to play through. I want to see the story and see what everyone's upset about and blow zombies' heads off. Also, I don't have the time to redo areas 6 or 7 times when I'm not enjoying them. But card games and board, I never really played a lot of the role-playing games, and I always wish I played Call of Cthulhu or something like that. But I can imagine that it will work quite well. I think the problem that you've got is that you have to take a fighter and lock them in time, whereas with EA or video games generally, you can update the fighters as time goes on. And really, they found ways to monetize that in some sports games. And in fact, they did in the UFC too. If a guy hadn't signed his contract to get his image in the game, and they've monetized Bruce Lee, his estate will just slap his face on anything. One of the big treats in that game is beating up Zabit's and Bruce Lee's as Frankie Edgar, just getting inside and hitting the body loads and throwing uppercuts at the ring lights. What I'm going to say is people with ideas for board game versions of MMA, drop them in the comments and then I will make it and sell it. I think it could be interesting. I do like the way that like board games play with probability and so on, and your stats modify probability and stuff, which I suppose is going to be less annoying than when you're playing like a like a C-rated fighter on EA UFC, and you're just getting trounced because all your stats are lower than the other guy, you know? I think because there's agency there and you feel like you should be able to counteract it, that pisses you off more than if it were just rolling a dice or reading a number off a card. Right, I reckon that'll do us for this week. In terms of plans, if you want to get on the Patreon, support the podcast, get the stuff we do extra, do that. For the Patreon boys this week, I was thinking of doing something on Roy Jones, but particularly, and this is a weird outlook on this, the sort of period of his career where he was getting older and everyone sort of checked out because they were depressed, but he was still getting close to title fights. Well, I mean, he did get a title fight against Lebedev, didn't he? Actually, that was probably years before his retirement. That was when I started to feel sad. But towards the end of his career, he actually started using a load of really weird little tricks. Like he almost takes a double collar tie clinch and leans on the ropes, but he'll keep his hands off the back of the opponent's head and like use inside ties over his opponent's shoulders, and then he'll fight from there. He did it to Jeff Lacey loads, but you can watch him do it against all the like bums he fought when he was really old. Started using the jab more because he always favoured the right hand lead and the showy techniques, but started to rely more on like orthodox boxing as well as the weird looks and stuff like that. So I'm thinking of finding some of his better performances once he recognised that he was slowing down, and looking at why or some of the things that he did to mitigate that, which I always find interesting. And of course, that's going to be pretty topical because he's going to fight Tyson. And of course, Tyson did not adapt well to his age and slowing down. And also, his technique really took, or his ideas certainly, really took a step back once he stopped working with his familiar team. So possibly this week, maybe next week, but there'll be something up for the Patreon boys this week. And of course, everything I do for the Patreon boys has audio too, so you don't even have to be able to read. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to read what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Derek Brundleman's skyscraper knees bless.